And welcome back for the second episode of this particular painting. Since I'm experimenting with all this, I don't know how many episodes I'll do on anything. But as you can see right here, I'm getting myself set up. I'll run through some of the things that I had to do here in a moment in the process of getting set up. So the sketch is before you. What's on top of the sketch is the picture itself, and that picture is divided, as you see where I put the line. That's approximately where I'm going to be kind of cutting the picture off in my painting, and that's what we arrived at when we did the sketch last time. So now I have to get everything prepared. Now what I do on my easel here is I have a couple of bulldog clips, and one of them is where that picture goes, and that sketchbook just goes on the floor because that's all the space I have for it right now. But as you can tell, I have a piece of paper that is taped down right there. This is a Canson XL watercolor paper. It is not my favorite paper. This is the cheap paper, and I use masking tape with it because masking tape has a tendency to rip the paper a little bit. I'm not worried about this painting. This painting is a value study, and I'll tell you what that means here in a little bit. So I got my ruler out. I'm marking my thirds for the page and getting all set up. It may surprise people, but this is actually relaxing to me. So the fact that I can do this type of thing and just slowly work on something that will have a result at the end of it, where I can get done and look at something, is very relaxing for my own processing part. Now, I don't know, maybe when I do this, I will speed this part up, because all I'm really doing is getting the basic structure down again. This sketch itself will be a bit cleaner than the one in the sketchbook. The sketchbook was really about the ideas. This here is about getting more of an approximation of where the buildings are in relation to the same size piece of paper I'll be using for the actual painting. But also, this is a value study, so I need the real big shapes down so I can begin to connect the shadows. And this is something I've been learning with watercolor over the last year, I would say, is focusing on how to connect the different values in the painting. Notice I said values, not colors. I say that because sometimes even I can get confused by that, and I start thinking, well, wait a minute, that's blue, that's not green, or, that's red, it's not purple. Well, that's not the point. Color's not the point. If they're going to be the same type of shadow, the same type of shade, that's the idea here. So as I work on this type of paper, this type of project, I'm always listening to music while I do this. It's something I've always done. Again, art is a way of relaxation for me, not a stress point. And doing this video for you, I am a little wary that I'm going to end up start stressing over putting out a video every week for my art instead of focusing on my art. So if I ever get to that point, I give you permission to yell at me and call me out on that. But I'm usually always listening to music, and one of the things, and this will probably come up in other videos too, is this is, again, a hobby for me. So everything I've learned about watercolor, I've either had the privilege of taking a class, most of those classes have been online, or I've just had to learn on my own, taken from knowledge from other art classes I took maybe in high school, or art classes I took after I started my career, but might have been painting acrylic instead of watercolor. Now, one of the reasons that I focus on this type of activity is while sketching and everything gives you a bit of control, what really happens for me is I have to have a lack of control when it comes to the watercolor painting itself. And I'll get more into that when the painting process begins. You'll see a little bit of that in this video as we get to the value painting. But again, so going back to this being a hobby, everything I do is mostly late at night. So for many people, everybody has different internal clocks, and I still have kids, and those kids have to go to bed early for school, or at least at a consistent time for school. And then my wife has always been an early to bed, early to rise person. I am not. I am certainly a night owl. So usually when everybody goes to bed, I have anywhere from 1 to 3 hours where I do things like this. I do art, I play video games, things of that nature to help me deprocess. I know I'm having a bad time if at that time I don't feel like doing anything. If I just want to watch TV and it's not even like watching a new program. So that's one of those more of my own personal little things that I've learned about myself over the years. So that being said, that this is, reminding that this is a hobby, that means you're going to see me make all sorts of mistakes on this entire process. Of course, at the time I'm doing this voiceover for this part of the project, I am in the process of doing the final painting, and boy, do I get to make some mistakes. But we'll see those at a later date. Thankfully, kind of my patron saint of painting is Bob Ross, so it's a good thing to be nice to yourself sometimes. Now, as I am doing this painting, or this sketch, I am thinking about Istanbul itself. So I've only had one opportunity to travel overseas to another country, and that was when I was in seminary. This picture is from that time period. I'm not a person who likes to live in the past. I try to stay focused where I'm at and look towards the future of what may be possible. But that doesn't mean I don't get nostalgic like everybody else and start thinking about what would have been or anything of that nature. But when painting a picture that is tied to a certain event or memory, then I tend to spend time reflecting on that. And when I say it that way, it's because sometimes I paint things just because they look cool. I have no real emotional attachment to whatever I'm painting. I'm just doing something different, or experimenting, or I just want to try to paint it. Some of the paintings that I have up on my shop right now are ones that I just thought, boy, that was a really cool picture. I'd love to paint that. I'd love to try my hand at painting that and see how it goes. But this is one of those where I think about the events during that trip. I think about what I was experiencing as a young man in seminary and learning things and looking forward to my career and being in the ministry and all those things. This was a kind of difficult time for me too, in the fact that Olivia, my oldest, would have been, I believe, about 6 months old at this point while I was overseas for 3 weeks. And she took her first step while I was over in Turkey. Katie tried to hide that from me for years, but I figured it out pretty much right away when I got home. It was only maybe about a year ago that she acknowledged that factor. But when I was here, in some ways, I remember a lot of good things about the trip. I remember it being stressful, though, and I remember, being worried about things at home for various reasons. But also, it was a good experience. I have some really great friends from that time. But of course, I also think back at it and go, like I think many people, boy, if I would have had a little bit more money, I could have went and did this that day instead of staying back at the hotel. Or, if I would have been a little more adventurous, I would have went out and did this thing or that thing with other classmates. But, that's life. We can always look in the past. They say that hindsight is 20/20. And it certainly is true. I also think hindsight is a pain in the hind, but that's a separate conversation for another day. The things that are going through my mind as I am working on this sketch right now is thinking about, however, the experience of seeing this type of architecture in person. The picture I'm working from is not the best quality. I did not have a very good camera. I didn't have the money for a good camera. But I remember those days being kind of gray and cloudy and all these sorts of things. But they were wonderful days because I was seeing and experiencing things I'd only read about or only seen pictures of. If anybody ever gets the chance, I'll do my little plug. If you get a chance to travel to Turkey when it's safe, I would highly recommend it. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience being in Istanbul. Now you'll notice again as I'm filling in these bushes and trees that are based in the picture, I'm getting the general shape down. I'm not worried, again, about getting into too many specifics. You'll notice with the building, it's still very blocky and not precise. I'm not trying to be precise. I don't want it to be precise right now. Part of this is because it is my hobby, and I do not want to be so stressed with replicating that I don't get to enjoy something that should be relaxing. The other part is, and I said that about replication, a hard lesson I've had to learn in painting, and this is one of the lessons that watercolor continues to push me on, is I'm painting. I'm not taking a picture. If you're like me, you look at art online sometimes, I see people who do realistic painting or realistic sketches. These are pieces of art that look like they're a photograph. They are almost exact replicas of whatever their subject matter is. And I do envy those artists. I would love to do that. I am not a sketch artist. I would love to be able to sketch my family members and it look like them, whereas what I tend to do, it doesn't quite look like them. This is not that type of art. This is a painting. For me, and my understanding and interpretation of paintings, is that I am going to interpret what I see so that I invite people into the experience of my world. That means things aren't going to look exactly the same. Things aren't going to come across exactly the same. In fact, what you will see eventually in, I believe, one of the next videos will be how I change the picture due to mistakes. Art is in the eye of the beholder, so how you might need to change things or do things differently, it all depends on how it comes together on that page for you. Now it's this time I'm starting to transition and get ready to do the value study. You always use a brush that's bigger than you need for watercolor. The intent of watercolor is those colors are supposed to go together and supposed to blend together. Sometimes. There's always exceptions. And even as I work on this painting in the official way, there's going to be exceptions. Sometimes you do want a pop of color. You don't want colors to run together. Sometimes you really do want those colors to remain separate. But, I mean, that's life, right? I mean, sometimes we want things to remain separate and they don't remain separate, and sometimes we want them together and they don't get together. So, we do the best we can. At this point, what you're not seeing me do is I'm trying to mix some color in my watercolor palette, and I think on the next video I'm attempting to be able to show you that as I do this. I don't know how that's going to work out. We'll see what happens. But I'm mixing some colors together. What I'm shooting for is a gray color. And you're going to see in this value study, I kind of fail horribly at getting a gray color this time around. When you mix a gray color, you typically mix a blue with a brown, and that'll give you your gray. But as you can see, as I put this brush down, that kind of looks a little bit more brown than gray. But guess what? This is a value study, so I don't have to worry about that. This is a dry painting technique. I am not using a wet painting. A wet painting technique is I would wet the whole paper down with a damp cloth, or I typically do it with a sponge or a brush. And then as you lay these colors down, those colors would kind of bleed out and spread across the paper. So you'll notice I didn't start with the sky. So the person I have been watching and learning from the most as far as doing value studies, I notice sometimes he does paint the sky. And I have found it more convenient not to, because the sky ends up being whatever baseline value that I'm doing. So we're going to do 3 levels of values. We're going to do our light values first. Then we're going to do our mid-range values, and then our darkest values. Now, I say light range. It's obvious that dome on Hagia Sophia there is not going to be white with a splash of color on the side. So that is, the white areas are my lightest possible wash. So that's going to be the initial color, whatever initial color I put down. Everywhere else, everywhere that you see right now that I'm painting, is going to be the next shade of darkness. Okay? I believe it was Bob Roth that said, if you ever watch him paint, he goes, you can't have light without a little bit of darkness in it. And this has been a difficult thing for me to learn, especially with watercolor, because watercolor tends to be a very light style of painting. Every color you put down for watercolor gets lighter as it dries. Now, I alluded to the fact that we're starting with our lighter values first, and that's because that's what you have to do with watercolor. There are other types of watercolor style paint. I believe they're called gouache, which I have not used yet, at least not used in a full-on painting style. And those can be used a little bit more similar to acrylics and be laid down very thickly, and you can do lighters on top of lighter layers or lighter colors on top of your other colors. But I'm using straight watercolors at the moment. Now you'll notice I didn't have a chance to say this, and when I did that ground at the bottom, I used long strokes as much as possible to try to get an even wash across. And yeah, it kind of worked. I did put those little lines on the top there, and I don't really think there's any reason I needed to do that, but I did it. So after a drying time that was not long enough probably, I came back for our second layer. Now, I say a drying time because I do not have a hair dryer or a heat gun or anything like that to speed up the drying process of my paintings. And I've thought about getting one. I may do that one day. But again, this is my hobby. I don't want to have to rush something. The joy for me is taking my time. So this is our mid-range values. You will notice there are less mid-range values than there were the light range values. And, that should seem fairly logical, or at least I think it should. The light, so you start to notice some of the building pop and change color, and I know you can see that there are little puddles of watercolor that are pulling up there. That's because I have way too much water on my brush, so there's way too much liquid going down, and you'll see me go back and kind of blot those up with a damp brush so that it's a little drier. But everywhere you're painting, I'm guessing you could have probably guessed that I was going to do that, except maybe those parts right there. Those are some of the shadows that will be on the ground. Shadows are very easily to forget on a flat surface, or a relatively flat surface like the ground. And so here I'm just trying to point out that, hey, there will be some shadows, because this value study painting will go and be clipped up on the other side of my board when I do the full painting. And when I do that full painting, it will help guide me to remember where I want those shadows to be. I've often found this is also a constant process of touch-ups where I realize, well, wait a minute, maybe a shadow will be right there. Now, the picture I'm basing this off of is a very cloudy day, and it's not a bright sunshine. So there are a few shadows in the photo that suggest to me where the sun is coming from, and so I'm basing all my decisions on that. Remember, again, when you're painting, when you're doing art is in the eye of the beholder. So you notice that one spot that was white I just painted over. It's not because I realized there was a shadow. It's actually because I realized there's too much white in that spot. I expect the white over on the right hand side with the sun and stuff like that, but that spot was just too much. Now this is after another drying period, and the brush that I showed you is a bit of a smaller brush than what I have been using. Because again, in this third level, we're going to paint even less. These are the darkest shadows, or where the darkest shadows will be. So even there, so I made a mistake and started painting on the wrong side, realizing there's nothing really there to give it a shadow. So, but some of those trees and bushes in the far background, they need to look darker. They're going to end up being, they're farther back, and this isn't a really far out scoped picture, so they're not going to be fuzzy like you might in a landscape get, where the tree line is kind of wonky in the back. This is straight on. They are going to be a darker value. As I'm doing this, I'm also remembering how many details, because I'll glance up at the picture every once in a while, realizing how many details are going to be in the picture when I do it officially, and thinking about, okay, I need to not worry about those details. A detail can make or break a painting, but they can also make or break your time off. So thank you for joining me on this, and I hope you're having a great day.